Michael Phelps did not merely dominate the water. He made time itself look fragile. In Beijing, 1/100th of a second separated victory from defeat, while 23 Olympic gold medals turned a restless boy from Baltimore into the most decorated Olympian in history. But the pool that once gave him sanctuary eventually became a prison of pressure, identity, and silence. Behind the podium smiles lived depression, isolation, and a man who no longer knew who he was when the racing stopped. Now, at 41, his greatest victory is not recorded on a stopwatch. It is the painful human work of learning to breathe on dry land. Before we begin, honor Michael Phelps with a tribute to the man behind the medals. The story of Michael Phelps begins with a child whose energy rarely seemed to fit the world around him. Michael Fred Phelps II was born on June 30th, music, 1985, in Baltimore, Maryland, and grew up in the Rogers Forge area near Towson. Music, in school, remaining seated and concentrating on a single lesson could feel far more difficult than the adults around him understood. Music, he was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder at approximately 9 years old during a period when the condition was still frequently treated as a failure of discipline rather than a difference requiring support. Phelps later recalled that one teacher told his mother, music, he would never be able to focus on anything. The judgment stayed with the family, music, because it reduced a restless, intelligent child to the behavior others found difficult to manage. He was also teased over his ears and the way he spoke, experiences that made school feel less like a place of discovery than another setting in which he could be singled out. Yet the same mind that resisted long stretches of classroom stillness could become intensely absorbed when something gave his energy a clear direction. He had not yet found that direction, but his life was already demonstrating a distinction that would later define him. Difficulty focusing on everything was not the same as being incapable of extraordinary focus on one meaningful pursuit. Another source of instability entered his childhood in 1994, music, when his parents divorced and 9-year-old Michael began navigating a more complicated relationship with his father. Phelps later described carrying feelings of abandonment from that period, but as a child, music, he did not yet possess the language or confidence to discuss them openly. His mother, Debbie, continued raising Michael and his 2 older sisters, Whitney and Hillary, while also trying to help her youngest child find a productive outlet for his energy. Swimming entered his life partly because his sisters were already involved in the sport. Michael followed them to the pool, although the future Olympic champion was initially uncomfortable in the water. He did not want to place his face beneath the surface, so his first instructor allowed him to begin by floating and moving on his back. The detail would later seem almost impossible. The athlete who would become more successful in water than anyone in Olympic history, music, once needed time simply to trust it. There was no instant revelation and no early certainty that he had found his destiny. Confidence arrived through small steps, music, learning to float, controlling his breathing, placing his face in the water, and discovering that fear became more manageable through repetition. As his comfort grew, the pool offered a kind of order that other parts of childhood did not always provide. The lane had visible boundaries. The black line beneath him showed where to go. Every length had a beginning, a wall, and a measurable conclusion. In school, Phelps' movement could be treated as disruption. In swimming, movement was the assignment. The energy that exhausted teachers could now be directed into strokes, turns, kicks, and the repeated effort of reaching the opposite end. Water did not erase odd, family pain, or the memory of being mocked. It gave him an environment in which those experiences did not determine the immediate task in front of him. Improvement could be felt in his breathing and recorded on a clock. That clarity helped turn swimming from an activity into a source of confidence. Phelps soon discovered that he was not merely comfortable in the pool. Music, he was unusually capable inside it. His long frame began developing. His feel for the water became more apparent, and competition gave him a place to test the focus others had doubted he possessed. The sport also provided structure at a moment when family life had changed, and school often left him frustrated. Practice demanded that he arrive, listen, repeat, and return the next day. Music, Each session gave him evidence that progress did not require becoming a different child. It required finding a setting where his energy could be trained rather than condemned. The pool was not a magical refuge that removed every difficulty from his life. Music, it became the first place where his differences could be organized into ability. Long before gold medals, world records, and packed Olympic arenas, swimming gave Michael Phelps something more basic, a task he could understand, and a reason to believe that the qualities causing trouble elsewhere might also contain possibility. The boy whom adults feared would never focus learned to follow one line across the bottom of a pool. In time, that line would carry him farther than anyone around him could have imagined. It would also begin tying his identity so closely to performance that the sanctuary of childhood would eventually become both the source of his greatness and a place from which he would struggle to separate himself. When Bob Bowman took responsibility for Michael Phelps's development at the North Baltimore Aquatic Club, he gave the restless young swimmer something his life had often lacked: a structure that left very little room for distraction. Bowman was demanding, analytical, and uncompromising about preparation. He studied stroke mechanics, turns, finishes, music, recovery, and the small technical details that separate an excellent swimmer from an Olympic champion. Phelps responded to that discipline with an extraordinary tolerance for repetition. During the most demanding years of their work together, he often covered roughly 5 miles in the pool each day, training 6 or 7 days a week. He later described multi-year stretches in which he did not miss a day, including holidays and birthdays. Much of adolescence became organized around the black line beneath him, the clock above the lane, and Bowman's expectation that every repetition serve a purpose. The schedule limited many experiences other teenagers considered ordinary, but it also gave Phelps a place where his restless energy could be directed toward measurable improvement. Bowman did not simply ask him to endure more work than other swimmers. He taught him to prepare for problems before they appeared, to know his stroke count, understand his pace, music, and continue racing when conditions no longer followed the plan. The results arrived early. Music. At 15, Phelps qualified for the 2000 Sydney Olympics, becoming the youngest American male swimmer to reach the Games in 68 years. He did not win a medal, but his 5th-place finish in the 200m butterfly placed him among the best swimmers in the world before he had completed high school. 4 years later in Athens, he won 6 gold medals and 2 bronze. Music. He also entered the heavily anticipated 200-meter freestyle final, known as the Race of the Century, finishing behind Ian Thorpe and Peter van den Hoogenband in a field filled with established champions. Athens proved that Phelps was no longer merely a gifted teenager. He had become one of the central figures in international swimming. His range allowed him across butterfly, freestyle, individual medley, and relay events. While his long reach, flexible ankles, efficient turns, and ability to maintain technique under fatigue gave Bowman an athlete capable of attempting something unprecedented. Their next objective was Beijing in 2008, where Phelps would try to surpass Mark Spitz's record of 7 gold medals at a single Olympic Games. The attempt survived several moments in which one mistake could have ended it. In the 4x100-meter freestyle relay, the United States entered the final exchange behind France. Jason Lezak produced a remarkable closing leg, overtaking Alain Bernard and preserving Phelps's pursuit of 8 victories. In the 100-meter butterfly, Phelps reached the wall 1/100th of a second ahead of Milorad Kavik, a margin too small for the unaided eye to judge. The finish did not feel accidental. Bowman and Phelps had spent years practicing the final strokes into the wall, preparing for a race that might be decided before conscious thought had time to intervene. The 200-meter butterfly created a different emergency. Water entered Phelps's goggles soon after the race began, steadily obscuring his vision. Music. Rather than abandon his rhythm, he relied on the stroke count practiced in training, judged the approaching wall without seeing it clearly, and still finished with a world record. By the end of the Games, he had won 8 gold medals, breaking a record that had stood since 1972. The public saw a swimmer who appeared prepared for every possible challenge. Only later did Phelps describe the personal cost of allowing performance to occupy nearly his entire identity. The structure that made him dependable in the pool offered little instruction for life beyond it. Training, racing, recovery, and the next Olympic target provided a clear answer to almost every daily question, while emotional needs could be postponed because another workout was always waiting. Looking back, music, he explained, for a long time I looked at myself as a swimmer and not a human being. Music, the statement does not diminish what he accomplished in Beijing. It reveals the imbalance hidden inside the achievement. Phelps had learned how to count his strokes when he could not see the wall, how to remain calm when a relay appeared lost, music, and how to tolerate pressure few athletes would ever experience. He had not yet learned how to separate his worth as a person from the numbers beside his name. Music, 8 gold medals made him an Olympic symbol. They also brought him closer to the question that no training plan had prepared him to answer: who was Michael Phelps when there was no race left to win? Success at the highest level can create a problem no training plan fully anticipates. After a person has spent years pursuing one defining objective, achievement does not automatically provide a reason to begin again. Following Beijing, Michael Phelps had reached a level of Olympic success that left few visible challenges untouched. But the physical and psychological effort required to reach that point had begun changing his relationship with swimming. The discipline that once felt purposeful became increasingly difficult to sustain. His preparation for the 2012 London Games was far less consistent than the work that had preceded Beijing, creating tension with Bob Bowman and revealing music that Phelps was no longer approaching every session with the same certainty. He still possessed extraordinary ability, experience, and competitive instinct, music, but motivation could no longer be assumed simply because another Olympics was approaching. London became his 4th Games, yet internally, music, it felt less like the continuation of a dream than the completion of an obligation he had already begun questioning. That conflict became visible in the 200-meter butterfly, an event he had dominated across much of his career. Phelps led near the finish, but glided into the wall while South Africa's Chad Leclasse completed one final stroke and won by 5/100ths of a second. The defeat was not evidence that Phelps had suddenly lost his greatness. It showed how narrow the difference could become when preparation, timing, and desire were no longer aligned as completely as they once had been. He recovered to finish London with 4 gold medals and 2 silver, surpassing Larissa Latynina to become the most decorated Olympian in history. From the outside, it was another remarkable Games. Phelps later described the experience in far darker terms. In London, I just wanted it to end. He was still capable of standing on the podium, but the act of reaching it no longer gave him the meaning it once had. The medals confirmed his historical status while revealing how little historical status could explain about